Welcome back to MMA Al Dente. I am the guy who had a death in the family. And now I am here exploiting that death on the internet, looking for some fucking sympathy and maybe an extra fucking subscriber. What do you think? Besides me being a scumbag. Any thoughts? All right. I'm here to talk about UFC 313, Pereira versus Ankalaev. This is an awesome card, a pay-per-view card, where even if the fights are utter dog shit, it's still going to be a good event. Although, don't hold me to that. Anyway, let's lose some money. Okay, opening up the card, we have John Castaneda versus Chris Gutierrez. My prediction for this fight is Gutierrez wins, and I've got him winning by tight decision. I said tight. This is a featherweight fight, a makeshift fight between two bantamweights. Each guy had an opponent drop out recently, so instead of worrying about cutting weight again to bantamweight, they decided to meet each other at featherweight. Obviously, that leaves room for some X factors to hit the surface, but unless somebody has a disastrous weigh-in, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think these guys will come in on track at 145 and be ready for 15 minutes. If either guy was susceptible to collapsing due to weak cardio or something like that, then I'd be looking into those X factors a little more. But I trust both guys here. So, yeah, I assume they're coming in on track. I'm going with Gutierrez winning by decision. And the technical basis for the prediction is that I think he is the sharper kicker. And in general, I think he'll be able to keep this one on the feet for most of the fight. And yeah, for the kickboxing bout, I think it may not he may not be superior right away with his leg kicks, but over the course of 15 minutes, I do think they take over and prove to be the best weapon. And it's not just leg kicks. He's got really good diverse attacks with his kicks, but the leg kicks are definitely the best weapon. But look, this is a fight that I said it should be a tight decision because John Castaneda has definitely got some things going for him. First of all, Chris Gutierrez is not Mr. Finisher. He's gotten some finishes a few different ways in the UFC, but in general, he's a point fighter at the UFC level. And in a fight that I do expect to go the distance, it doesn't hurt to have pressure on your side like John Castaneda does in this matchup. I certainly think he wins octagon control, whatever the fuck that means. And also, I think he's the more willing grappler. Not that I expect this one to be settled on the mat, but certainly if there are any points to be scored on the mat, I've got them going to John Castaneda. And if we should see that rare finish, I've got that going to Castaneda as well. He's definitely the better submission artist, and he's put a lot of guys away with round three arm triangles. A good chunk of his wins are like that. And I think he's definitely, in general, got more to offer. But I don't see him advancing on Chris Gutierrez down there. I think they're just points to be scored from control, but that's it. And on the feet, Castaneda, he's got a few inches of reach to help his pressure and help him time things, but he's still got to get through that kicking range to get off on Chris Gutierrez or to get in his face. And I do think technically that's the biggest advantage either guy's got is the kicking game, and it belongs to Chris Gutierrez, that advantage. But yeah, Castaneda, he's got a little more pop in his punches, perhaps. He's definitely got some good pop. And if Chris Gutierrez had a lesser chin, maybe I'd be going the other way with Castaneda. But Chris Gutierrez is rock solid. He's only ever been finished once, and it was a submission to Raoni Barcelos, who is an underrated submission artist. And on the feet, no one's been able to finish Chris. He was kind of stopped in his tracks by the power, thwarted by the power of Song Yadong. And I suppose there's a chance that could happen with Castaneda. But I don't think his power advantage will bring him the same success. I think maybe he's got a shot of clipping Gutierrez with the right shot and dropping him or something. But I don't think he's going to be able to consistently thwart him with a power advantage. And on the flip side, speaking of finishes, Castaneda has been finished twice. He was finished early in his career. I think his first loss to this guy, Matt Brown, who is not immortal. And he was finished in one of his more recent losses, 2 losses ago, I think, to Daniel Santos, who is making his return in a few weeks. But that was a fight. That was a wild fight, and one of the few wild fights that didn't go Castaneda's way. He actually had Santos hurt early, but then ended up getting finished and knocked out ultimately at the end of round 2. Chris Gutierrez is not Mr. Concussive Blow, though. He's a guy where if he finishes you, it's generally him chopping you down the stretch. He's done it to some really good fighters, Vince Morales and Jimmy Flick and whoever else. So it can certainly happen here. But again, I think the primary path to victory for each guy is decision. And my pick is Gutierrez wins by decision. I haven't bet on him yet. The odds are razor thin, the money line, but I'm going to wait for everything here. Certainly the over, and also the decision props and the plus points. I think plus points could not be a bad play here for Castaneda because I expect him to make it close. I expect him to get in Gutierrez's face, have something to offer on the feet and on the ground, despite picking against him. Chris Gutierrez by decision is the pick, and then all the other horseshit I said is a bunch of fucking horseshit. Next up, we have Ozzy Diaz versus Jordan Santos, otherwise known as Jordan Ribeiro dos Santos. Whatever. My prediction for this fight is Santos wins, and I've got him winning by decision, even though that doesn't make a lot of sense when I plug in their records. Because Ozzy Diaz, first of all, has a record of 9-3 with all finishes. 9 finishes and victory, and in particular, all 3 of his losses are knockouts. And that's something you'd hear me harping on, especially when I'm picking against him. And you'll hear me harp on that in future fights, perhaps, but not in this one. I'm picking against him here, but I think Jordan Santos' most likely path to victory is slowing the fight to a crawl and winning with a decision. First of all, I don't think Jordan has the firepower to go through the chin of Ozzy Diaz. Although if a chin is that bad, even I could probably crack it. I don't think Santos has that firepower. And secondly, on the feet, I think he's shaky to begin with. I haven't seen the most footage of this guy, to be honest, compared to most guys making their UFC debuts. But I've still seen enough footage and a lot of good recent footage. And he's still not the most comfortable guy on the feet. And I think Ozzy Diaz will make him feel uncomfortable. Ozzy, despite whatever durability issues he has, he's got danger on his side. The guy's a very dangerous guy. And I think if Dos Santos isn't looking to grapple from the outset after an exchange or two, he's going to be looking to slow this fight down to a crawl. And I think he'll be able to do so. I think if he makes this a more physical fight, he can be stronger on the inside and control Ozzy. Ozzy is bigger. He's 6'4". Got 4 inches of height on him, but he is a guy that fought at middleweight in years past. What am I writing? A fucking Christmas book or whatever? I don't know. Anyway, I do think Jordan Santos will win a more physical fight here. Ozzy Diaz, he's the better guy on the feet, the more dangerous guy, and I'd say the more comfortable guy, despite him being on the receiving end of plenty of knockouts, including in his last fight. He's still relatively young, and I know he's recovered from that knockout loss, but obviously he's got a problem. I don't want to say he's got a button on his chin, but could be. Regardless, it's a major obstacle moving forward, a major problem moving forward, but I don't think so in this matchup. I think in this matchup, he's going to lose a whole nother type of fight here against Jordan Santos. If Ozzy Diaz was to win, I'd favor it to be by knockout before anything else. Even though Santos' 1 loss is by decision. He's never been finished, submitted, and whatever. He's got it all going on paper. But the guy's shaky on his feet. He's been clipped a few times that I've seen, and it's not like he even got rocked or whatever, but he just looked a little shaky. I'll just lean on that word. But still, despite the advantage and the danger and the rest of it for Ozzy Diaz there, my pick has to be Jordan Dos Santos, slowing this fight to a crawl and winning a decision. Again, 3 decisions in his career, and they are in his last 3 fights, one of which was 5 rounds, which I was able to see. And I think he's going to be employing a lot of the same tactics and out hustling and out grappling Ozzy Diaz over the course of 15 minutes. So that is the prediction. Next up, we have Mairon Santos versus Francis Marshall. My prediction for this fight is Santos wins, and I've got him winning by decision. And I hope I'm wrong about that. But I am going with Santos. I think in general, he's a step ahead on the feet. Marshall's coming along, and he's definitely looked good in the UFC, but I think he's going to be a step behind Mairon Santos on the feet. On the flip side, I think Francis Marshall would be a step ahead on the ground. But the crux of the matter is who's going to win the wrestling battle. And even though I expect Marshall to get him to the mat, I don't think it's going to be for the majority of the fight. And again, on the feet, I think Santos is going to be too much. Not to the point where he stops Marshall, but to the point where he pulls away with a victory and a comfortable lead. I think Santos is really sharp on the feet. He's got an excellent diverse attack. He'll chop you down low. He'll rip you with combination punches, go to the body. He's got great knees, even counter knees, which are great for somebody looking to get in on his hips. And the guy also is seasoned beyond his years. Both these guys are in their mid-20s, but Santos is 24, and it's a good look, him having won a lot of decisions. Half of his victories, or thereabout, are decision victories. And a few more tough battles that don't count on his record, he won on the Ultimate Fighter as well. So he's not a guy that you could expect to collapse down the stretch, even though his one loss was him getting TKO'd on the ground in round 3 against Dan Argueta, who I think is still in the UFC. But if not, he's underrated. But yeah, that was his one loss. That was actually only a few fights ago, a few professional fights ago. But since then, he's been on the Ultimate Fighter and I'm sure leveled up in a lot of ways. And he's looked great so far in the Ultimate Fighter and the UFC. And here, I think he's got to worry about the ground attack of Francis Marshall, not just the wrestling, but once he gets there, Francis Marshall could be a problem on the ground. He's good at advancing, and he's got a monster rear naked choke. Mairon Santos has never been submitted. He could be a fucking jiu-jitsu black belt for all I know. But as a fighter, he's trying to keep himself off the ground. And as a fighter, he doesn't even have one submission victory. So it stands to reason that Marshall would be the man down there in this matchup. Marshall, he's got a lot of rear naked chokes. I think most of his victories are rear naked chokes, even as an amateur. And of course, he almost got another one over William Gomis in his UFC fight. Had him, I thought, dead to rights. But yeah, he's a guy that so far in the UFC, Marshall, he's had mixed results. He was finished for the first time and the only time against Isaac Dogarian. And even though it's a TKO, that was a total ground loss. You could attribute it to wrestling or jiu-jitsu, but not striking. And his other loss was to William Gomis, which was a really close fight. And I thought Marshall was the last man standing and was giving William Gomis hell. And it was a good look in a lot of ways. But Gomis was too much on the feet, a little too tough to corral and to wrangle. And he was too sharp for him. So he was a half step behind in that fight. And in the end, lost a split decision, despite rallying in the end. But yeah, he's tough, Marshall. His one TKO loss, like I said, it doesn't say anything about his chin, which is what would have to give here for him to get finished. And I think at the very least, he stands tall and makes it to the final bell. Maybe even steals a round with his wrestling and his pressure. But I've got Santos winning this fight. I think Santos, again, he's seasoned beyond his years, really comfortable, even in a long fight. and the guy looks really sharp. I've seen him through the Ultimate Fighter now in a lot of high-level battles, and aside from that Dan Argetta fight, the guy is always there in the end, and he always looks sharp. So I don't think Francis Marshall is going to be able to drown him or anything. And of course, Mairon Santos has more MMA experience, I believe, more professional fights to begin with, even though Marshall's obviously been in the UFC for longer. So yeah, Santos is the pick. I've got him winning by decision. I have not bet on that. I'll be honest. I'm tempted to bet on Francis Marshall, but I have not bet on that either. So I'll see if anything opens up with the props. Maybe I can waste some fucking money. Next up, we have Carlos Leal Miranda versus Alex Morono, where I'm picking this guy, but I'm betting on this guy because the odds are fucking crazy. They're crazy. Alex Morono's a 5-1 underdog. Yesterday he was a 6-1 underdog. That makes no fucking sense. I mean, don't get me wrong. My prediction is Carlos Leal Miranda wins. I've got him winning by decision, although a TKO wouldn't totally surprise me, but I'll go decision. Still, having said that, Alex Morono, despite having been finished a few times and even kind of collapsed cardio-wise a few times, he's still historically been very tough and historically been very competitive with everybody he's been in there with. And I don't expect anything different in this fight with Carlos Leal Miranda. I do think Miranda will get in his face and slow him down, but I think Alex Morono is a well-rounded guy. I think he's the more dangerous submission artist. And on the feet, he's deceptively dangerous, but I don't know. I think I got to stop saying that. And also, he moves well. Alex Morono can be very light on his feet and difficult to corral. And I do think he'll have that advantage certainly early on against Carlos Leal Miranda. But I do think Miranda will catch him, if not clip him and stop him in his tracks. I think he will get a hold of him and slow him down and start to beat him up in a more physical fight. But yeah, Morono, we've seen him. He's been in the UFC for whatever it is now, probably over a decade. And he's still, despite some ugly losses throughout the years, he's still going strong. There's no major weakness to him. I wouldn't say he has a weak chin. I wouldn't say he has weak cardio, even though he's slowed down in fights against Nico Price and even against D-Rod. Not that he collapsed there. But yeah, you can see he's not the perfect fighter, but he's definitely in the realm of winning this, and the odds are just too fucked. I'm sorry. Sometimes the video, it just has to be about the odds. And that's what this is. I've got Miranda winning, but not going to be anywhere worth betting on him, even by the time the odds change, let's say. It's never going to be worth betting on him. The odds are far too wide. And for Alex Morono, it will never, the odds won't close at anything where it's not worth betting on Morono, even though I don't have too much faith in it. Yeah, he's 5-6-1. I think the play for Morono would be decision. And it's one where I would, maybe if the odds were worth it, I'd play plus points for Alex Morono because it covers everything and a tight decision loss. But I think here, with his odds being so inflated, I'm just going to waste a little money on Alex Morono winning by decision. Carlos Leal Miranda's really fucking tough. He hasn't been in the UFC too long, but he's really fucking tough. He's only ever been finished once, and it was a submission. But I'd be surprised if Alex Morono was able to knock out or submit him. However, I wouldn't be too surprised at all if he was able to outpoint him, like the majority of the guys who beat him. So, yeah, I'll take a little bit of money and waste it on Alex Morono by decision. That is the play. But the pick is certainly Carlos Leal Miranda. He's a younger, healthier newcomer. I think he's an excellent grinder himself, and also the more dangerous guy, in addition to being the more durable guy. So that's what I just did. I built up the Alex Morono bet over the course of the first 90% of this breakdown, and then I just tore it all down in the end. Only to come back and say, yeah, I'm wasting money on Morono because I'm a jerk off. Next up, we have Armin Petrosyan versus Bruno Ferreira. My prediction here is Armin Petrosyan wins, and I'm going to go with him winning by knockout for some stupid fucking reason, even though I could certainly see him winning a decision. He's won nothing but decisions. He's been a point fighter at the UFC level, but Bruno Ferreira is a true killer be killed fighter. He's never been the distance, and he's only been outside of round one pretty much once. I mean, twice, I guess he won within the first 30 seconds of round two. But as far as competitive fights go, there's only been one of them that went past round one, and that was the fight that he lost against Abus Magomedov via round three submission, arm triangle choke. And while that's not a possibility for Armin Petrosyan, who I do think is outgunned on the ground, I still think in general Armin Petrosyan fares better down the stretch in a 15-minute fight. Bruno Ferreira is not reliable in round three. Again, he's only been there once and it was a loss. But look, Armin Petrosyan's the guy who I have more doubt in his chin. And of course, Bruno Ferreira is the guy that I have more faith in his power. So I see how that shit plugs in. And Bruno winning by knockout would not surprise me. But I think he's got a small window to get it done, a short window. Round one, pretty much. And again, he's got another two victories, 30 seconds into round two. But he's pretty much a round one or bust fighter. Now, look, it's not like he completely collapsed against Abus Magomedov. I thought he kind of did in round three, but it's not like he wasn't there in round two. And I know he's training hard for 15-minute UFC fights, and he's in his prime right now. So I'm not saying you can count on him to collapse either. But I have to favor Armin Petrosyan, a guy who's been there, done that, and won plenty of 15-minute fights, even some of them being robberies. But he's still a guy that is much more equipped to win that fight, the longer fight. And that's what I'll take happening, I guess, as my prediction. But Armin, he's definitely more dangerous than he's ever looked in the UFC. He's done nothing but win on points, but those are his only points victories. Before coming to the UFC, he had plenty of knockouts, all knockouts, and just about every one of them was with his kicks, high kicks and body kicks. But yeah, the guy's definitely not the most concussive fighter, punch for punch, but he's a technically sharp kickboxer, and I do think he'll have a technical advantage over Bruno Ferreira here. And yeah, Bruno, if Bruno Ferreira had lost decisions before, even won decisions, then I'd feel more comfortable saying Petrosyan by decision. But Bruno's only lost twice. He was knocked out cold against Nursultan Ruzaboyev in Nursultan's UFC debut, I believe. And then he was submitted against Abus Magomedov, which, whatever. I mean, the submission game isn't going to be a factor of Armin Petrosyan's, but cardio could win him that fight, this fight here. On the flip side, look, Petrosyan's been knocked out a few times. Knocked out by this guy Hassan Yousefi before he got to the UFC, and knocked out against Shara Bullet in his last fight. And he's no spring chicken at 30 fuck years old, whatever it is. So Bruno Ferreira, with all that combined with Bruno Ferreira's danger, which is fucking visible. I mean, we just in his UFC career alone, you can see the power. I think I'd be surprised if Bruno won any other way but knockout against Armin Petrosyan. Although I'll say this, Bruno Ferreira should be trying to mix it up. I don't know if he's well equipped to mix it up because again, you might need cardio to start trying to wear your opponent down and build up the lactic acid in their shoulders or whatever the fuck. I don't know if Bruno has it in him to fight and employ these long-term tactics, but I do think Bruno, whether he's able to wear him down or not, is better on the ground. I think Bruno certainly has the better chance of closing the show and getting a submission or even a ground and pound finish. I think he's positionally dominant on the ground. And of course, I think he's the only guy willing to take the fight to the ground in the first place. And hopefully he does. I'd like to see him show wrinkles as a fighter. I like Bruno Ferreira. But the prediction here has to be Armin Petrosyan. I'm going with Armin Petrosyan. Of course, he knows he's got to worry about his chin. and certainly in this matchup. But I think if he gets out of round one, it's going to be a lot rosier of an outlook for Armen Petrosyan, and he'll find a way to win this fight, whether it's by TKO, uh, probably with a kick, or cruising increasingly more comfortably to a decision over Bruno Ferreira. But yeah, I'd love to see Bruno win a fight we have not seen him win in the UFC. Take the fight to the ground, mix things up, attempt a submission. I'd like to see Bruno show that he's not the brawler going against the technical striker here. But still, I have to go with Petrosyan. I do think in general this is going to be contested on the feet. And even though there's plenty of doubt with Petrosyan and his chin and whatever, I've got him getting by round one and being the much better equipped fighter to win a 15-minute fight. We've already seen it plenty of times at the UFC level, even with a robbery or something against Gregory Rodriguez. But yeah, I'm going with Armen. Next up, we have Ray Tsuruya taking on Joshua Van. My prediction for this one is Joshua Van wins, and I'm going to go with him winning by round 3 TKO, just for shits and giggles, I guess. But certainly a decision wouldn't surprise me. And if he does win a decision or even wins a round 3 TKO, he's probably going to be even, if not losing, early on, and then accelerate and take over the fight down the stretch. Because that's what Joshua Van has done in just about every fight in the UFC. The only exception is his loss to Charles Johnson, where Joshua Van was up 2 rounds and then he got knocked unconscious. Charles Johnson, as is the case often, and as was the case a few days ago, he was down 2 rounds. He had his back against the wall. He's been in that spot a lot. And that guy's a true round 3 fighter. But again, he knocked out Joshua Van. If he didn't separate him from his senses, I'm still very interested in seeing what that round 3 would have looked like. Because nobody's outlasted Joshua Van as of yet. But yeah, every one of his fights in the UFC, most of them being by decision and just 1 TKO, they've all looked the same. Him dropping round one, and then winning rounds 2 and 3. And again, he got the TKO finish over Felipe Bunez. I think Joshua Van has a lot of great traits. I mean, they're undeniable at this point. He's got true grit. Good movie, by the way, both of them. But he's got true grit, Joshua Van. And to even have a shot at having grit, you need cardio, tenacity, and durability. Durability is the only thing you could question, but it's not something that is solid because Joshua Van is still a young kid. And of course, that's the only time he's been knocked out. He was also submitted, though, and that's really the loss that you'd have to look to here against Ray Tsuruya. He was submitted against Devon Jackson. I think his name is Jackson. Either way, his first name is Devon, or maybe it's Devin. I don't know. But I've seen the fight multiple times. And the guy was just a physical problem for Joshua Van. And I think Joshua Van can suffer from a physicality disadvantage if somebody is able to get in tight with him and stop him from moving around in round 3. But that's what this guy did. He stopped him from even getting to round 3. He was able to really control Joshua Van with wrestling and jiu-jitsu, put him in a few good submissions, but Joshua Van kept fighting out of it until he couldn't. He was trapped and ended up getting choked at the end of round 2. I do think that's the path to victory for Ray Tsuruya here. He may not be as thoroughly dominant, because I'm sure Joshua Van's gotten a lot better, but his path to victory lies on the ground. All of his paths to victory lie on the ground, even the TKO path, despite the standing knockout loss for Joshua Van. But yeah, Ray Tsuruya is the grappler here. This is very much a grappler versus striker matchup. Who the fuck says that? It's striker versus grappler. But this is very much one of those. And Ray Tsuruya, there's no obvious downside to him as a fighter. He's never lost. And that's part of the reason I'm picking round 3 TKO. Because I think for a guy who's never tasted defeat, with Joshua Van and all of his traits carrying him to a victory, I think that victory is more likely, when you've never lost, to look like a TKO. But regardless, Ray Tsuruya, if he gets his fight to the mat, he's going to have an advantage, whether he tries to speed it up in advance or slow it down and control. And to be honest, I think he might be better off doing that. But he is a guy who's only won 2 decisions. He's much more of a finisher. It was a good look, I think, getting a decision victory over Carlos Hernandez, who's a reliable scrapper. But that's part of the reason why I'm picking against him, I guess, that fight. So I don't know why I'm praising him so much. I did think he won, of course, but I do think Joshua Van can outlast him like Carlos Hernandez did, but do that on steroids. No accusations. And I think Joshua Van is a fucking big problem for anybody down the stretch, aside from maybe Charles Johnson. But yeah, Ray Tsuruya on the mat. I think he would be better off trying to slow this fight to a crawl so he doesn't burn himself out. Joshua Van is really good at getting up, and he's definitely better on the feet. So with a fighter that's never faced defeat and not been in too many competitive fights, getting tired and having his takedowns fail, I think that'll lead to Joshua Van really accelerating, pulling away, and increasing his chances of getting a finish. I feel like I started trying to make another point, and I ended up making that point for like the third fucking time. All right, I got to check out here from this one. But yeah, Joshua Van is the pick. I got him winning by TKO in round 3. I bet on him just as money line, but you bet your ass I'll throw a sprinkle on my bullshit prediction. Next up, we have Curtis Blaydes versus Rizvan Kuniev. Even though I feel like these cocksuckers are going to start calling him Rizvan Kuniev any day now. Who are these cocksuckers? I have no idea. But I am picking Curtis Blaydes to win. I've got him winning by decision, although I'd love to see him close the show and get a TKO or even a rare submission. But I'm going with him winning by decision. I do think Curtis Blaydes is not so durable, but I can't say his chin is under such a big threat here, even though my only bet so far is on Rizvan Kuniev by TKO. But that's because I'm a jerk off. Really, it's because I do consider that his primary path to victory. I can't say only path to victory, not until he fights in the UFC for a few minutes, but I do think that's his primary path to victory, and it is certainly Curtis Blaydes' primary path to defeat. So at inflated odds, I figured I'd play it, plus 650 and plus 1400 for round 1 or whatever. But my pick is definitely Curtis Blaydes wins. I think Curtis moves better on the feet. I think if his wrestling is non-existent, like I think it might be, then I still think Curtis Blaydes moves well on the feet. I think he's the faster guy, and of course his striking has come a long way throughout the years. I think he can definitely be a problem for Kuniev, especially with his movement. And I also think, of course, if he didn't forget how to wrestle entirely, he's still one of the better heavyweight wrestlers. I used to say he's the best heavyweight wrestler. He's going to fucking dominate John Jones, all this shit. I still kind of stand by that, though, to be honest. I think he's a problem for John Jones. But I do think that his wrestling is not as reliable as it once was. But I still think even if he can't go through Rizvan and get him to the mat, I think with the way he moves and strikes now, he can set up shots and at least get in on him and bully him, turn a corner and control him in the clinch, like he did to Alexander Volkov for 45 minutes or however long that fight was. But I have to pick Curtis Blaydes here. I do think, he can control him with his grappling and with his striking to an extent. I think he can control him as well. I don't think Rizvan has the athleticism to catch Curtis Blaydes like other guys do, and I don't think he's near as dangerous as the class of fighter. I don't think he's in the class of the guys that have beaten Curtis Blaydes. Sergey Pavlovich, Tom Aspinall, Derek Lewis, and Francis Ngannou. 4 of the hardest hitting heavyweights ever. Maybe the 4. I don't know. Rumble hit pretty fucking hard at light heavyweight. But regardless, yeah, Rizvan Kuniev, even though I bet on him winning by TKO, remember, I'm just a jerk off. But he doesn't have that kind of firepower. I don't think he can turn the fight around on a dime against Curtis Blaydes. the sprinkle, which is really what it is, it's not even a small bet. The sprinkle on him winning by TKO is really just a bet against Curtis. Going, it's his primary path to defeat. And he's the older guy with a lot more mileage and blah, 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 and whatever. But at the same time, the mileage he's racked up in the UFC, and that's why I'm picking him to win. I think he is the better fighter. He's been fighting at a very high level for a long time. And Rizvan Kuniev, he doesn't have that signature win because it was taken away from him because he tested positive for a fucking entire pharmacy when he fought Renan Pereira. It was like a pharmacy. They got him with fucking band-aids and shit on him too. But still, he did beat him on that night. That would have been his signature win. But now his signature win, I guess, is Anthony Hamilton, former UFC fighter. So there's that. But yeah, he just, on that level alone, I have to go with Curtis Blaydes. The guy is too unproven. He's got a very pretty record, but he hasn't beaten anybody near the level of fighter that Curtis Blaydes has been beating for the last 10 years. Rizvan's record is pretty. It's 12-2. Both of his losses are by decision, and they are both to former UFC fighters. Darko Stosic and I fucking know this. Oh, Justin Willis, Big Titty, who Curtis Blaydes retired, ironically. Big Titty. But yeah, losing to those two guys by decision in like your third and fourth fights, or maybe it's like fourth and fifth fights, there's no shame in that. And I think that's a good look for his profile as a fighter. But still, it's not all about the records. I mean, I've seen the guy fight every fight I can get my hands on, and I think he's just not that big of a threat to Curtis Blaydes. I think Curtis moves better, strikes well. Curtis does have the durability issue, but I still think Curtis can be the man there. And of course, I think Curtis Blaydes is the faster guy who can set up takedowns. I think the Curtis Blaydes of old, who I used to say was the best fucking wrestler, I think he would be too much, certainly, for Rizvan. But if he's not that guy, I still think he's got enough in him to slow this fight to a crawl and to dominate the positions, whether it's standing or on the ground, smothered in the clinch, whatever. I think Curtis would be winning that battle. So Curtis Blaydes is the pick. I haven't bet on him yet, and I don't think I'm going to bet on him. This might be one where I just play the primary path to victory for the other side because I think the odds are inflated and I can plug in their records and go, yeah, it's not that big of a long shot. So that's probably just the play. Opening up the main card, we have Bobby Green versus Mauricio Ruffy. My prediction here is Mauricio wins, and I've got him winning by knockout. And the basis for the prediction is that Bobby Green is now 38 and a half years old. And Mauricio Ruffy is incredibly dangerous, really strong, and moves very well. He's a very comfortable diver striker. And I think he's going to be able to go through Bobby Green. Historically, Bobby Green's been incredibly durable and really tough to dominate. And I do think he would have been giving Mauricio Ruffy hell in his prime. And I probably would have been picking him to win and certainly betting on him. But here, he's a big underdog, and I haven't bet on him yet. Of course, by Saturday, I will have bet on him. I'll probably throw a sprinkle on him winning by decision. But I do think Bobby Green is just not reliable these days. His chin, it was always rock solid. He was knocked out by Dustin Poirier for the first time in 2016 at UFC 199. He was TKO'd before that with a retirement against Tim Means, where he was exhausted and beaten up, but it wasn't like his chin failed him. But his chin failed him 10 years ago against Poirier and twice in the last 2 or 3 years against Drew Dober and against Jalen Turner, who he has to see on this card because they're both on the main card here. So yeah, Bobby Green with the compounded knockout losses and his age and the rest of it, and I guess also getting submitted for the first time in 15 years in his last fight. Somehow that's a big stain on his record. I do think he's definitely on the downswing, and I think Mauricio Ruffy, despite not having a perfect performance against James Yantop, I think he's going to be too much for Bobby Green here. He's got that really dangerous, flowy, diver striking. He's really smooth, and he's a risk taker as well, which could certainly haunt him. But so far in the UFC, he's looked great. And I do think he's powerful enough to put Bobby away instead of just outstriking him. Mauricio Rufi's got one loss. It was a knockout loss to Manuel Sosa, who recently lost to Archie Colgan in Bellator. These are all fucking monsters that'll probably be in the UFC one day. But that one loss is to a very dangerous guy. Guy Manuel Sosa is a really good fighter, and Rufi had him hurt before getting knocked out. But in the end, he got clipped down the stretch in round 2, and that was that. His last fight against James Yantop was a solid decision victory, no dispute about it at all. But he couldn't put James away, and James did outlast him. And of course, I bet on James to win. But James really took it to him in round 3. I thought he did kind of take over, but I did think Rufi kind of knew he was ahead and he just needed to not get finished, and he was walking away with a victory. So maybe he managed himself well there. But still, he definitively lost round 3, and that wasn't the greatest look. And you know what, Bobby Green, historically, with all of his traits and whatever, when he was in his prime, he would be a guy that would make you pay down the stretch like that. Bobby Green is a very comfortable 15-minute fighter. He sure is. I'm sure he still is, at even at 38 and a half years old. It's not like your cardio falls off a cliff. But Bobby Green, I still think he himself is not the most imposing fighter. He's lost a lot of tight decisions because he's not so imposing, and he's left room for his opponents there. And I think he wouldn't be the most likely guy to knock out Rufi, even down the stretch if he got him tired. So I think Bobby Green, in his prime, would have a much better shot at winning against Mauricio Rufi, but I'd still say his primary path to victory would be a tight decision. And here, outside of his prime, I don't think we're going to hear about decisions. I think Rufi is going to go through his chin, but even if it does go the distance, I think Rufi would still be the better man there. I think he would win the decision, even though my only bet will be on Bobby Green by decision at plus 600. But that's because I'm a degenerate and he's such a big underdog, and I do think that's his primary path to victory. So I'll waste a sprinkle. But the pick is definitely Rufi wins by knockout, and you can bet on that at minus 115 or minus 125, close to even money. I don't consider that a lock by any means, even though it's all knockouts for him, aside from that James Yantop fight. But again, Bobby Green, I mean, he's got so much experience where if his chin doesn't fail him, I think everything else will keep him afloat. And at the very least, he would go the distance. So I'm picking the knockout, but I'm not betting on it. And yeah, the pick is Rufi by knockout. Next up, we have Yasmin Lucindo versus Amanda Lemos. My prediction for this fight is Yasmin Lucindo wins, and I've got her winning by decision. And the basis for the prediction is I think even though Amanda Lemos is a force to be reckoned with and probably the second most dangerous girl in the division after Jessica Andrade, I do think Yasmin Lucindo can out-wrestle her. I think on the feet she's well equipped to hang with Lemos, but if there are no takedowns scored, I would favor Lemos to win a decision there, just with her power scoring her points. But with takedowns, of course, I think the points on the mat are there to be scored by Yasmin Lucindo. I think Amanda Lemos, she doesn't have dog shit takedown defense, but it's certainly not perfect. And Yasmin Lucindo, I think, is a solid takedown artist. And of course, she's a young, fresh athlete. And I've got her making that the difference in this fight. Again, I think she's well equipped to handle herself on the feet, but I do think that power and danger of Lemos, while it is always good to score her finishes, I think here against Yasmin Lucindo, it will score her points. And even if she's behind on the volume, Lemos is visibly damaging. Where, yeah, I think Yasmin Lucindo will be a half step behind there over the course of 15 minutes. But on the mat, of course, Yasmin Lucindo, she's been able to mix things up and score valuable points on her way up to this matchup here. And this is a very high profile matchup. And I think she's going to be able to score some points here again against Lemos by taking her to the mat. Yasmin Lucindo's been finished a bunch, but it's all back when she was a fucking teenager. She might still be a teenager for all I know. She's really fucking young. But yeah, those losses are forgivable. And certainly I don't think she's going to be easy to get out of there by TKO or submission. And her TKO, by the way, to Gabriela Fernandez, that was on the ground where she was kind of reversed with a triangle and TKO'd from the mounted triangle. So my point is, it's not like her chin failed her in that TKO loss you see. But I think TKO submission, even if she was completely knocked out, I would dismiss it because it happened way back when she was a fucking teen. And here, the girl that we have in front of us is a girl that's been fighting in the UFC now for a few years, and she looks rock solid. I think it's going to be really difficult for anybody to get her out of there. And I am expecting her to stand up to the danger of Amanda Lemos, even in defeat. I think if Amanda Lemos wins this fight, her primary path to victory is decision. And for Yasmin Lucindo, the same exact thing. And the over is at minus 270. I've played it, but let's face it, that's not the best number. And again, to reiterate, Amanda Lemos is the second most dangerous girl after Jessica Andrade. Punch for punch, maybe arm triangle for arm triangle. Got to give that one to Andrade with the standing arm triangle. Some of you probably have no fucking clue what I'm talking about, but I think most of you do. Either way, she submitted Amanda Lemos with a standing arm triangle. But yeah, I do think this will be a tight decision, and plus points could be playable here. You have Amanda Lemos at minus 220 plus 3.5 points. I'm not too comfortable with that. I like those plus points to be at a juicier number, and I do think there is certainly a chance Yasmin Lucindo, if her wrestling is on fire here, can shut out Amanda Lemos on the scorecards. But again, I am envisioning a close fight, but I do give the advantage to Yasmin Lucindo. Yasmin Lucindo by decision is the pick, and that is at plus 120, I believe. Her money line is at minus 140. That's a decent jump, but I've played the money line because I just feel more comfortable covering the fucking doctor stoppage due to a laceration. But yeah, I'm going with Lucindo here. I typically like the veterans and the UFC stars and vets, but every now and then I'm going with the youngster, and that's what I'm doing here. Next up, we have Ignacio Bahamondes versus Jalen Turner. My prediction for this fight is Turner wins, and I'm going to go with him winning by submission. And the basis for the prediction is I'm an idiot. No, but I do know he's been working on his grappling since his loss to Renato Moicano. And I do think even without the recent work, it would have been an advantage of his in a fight with Bahamondes. But I think here, if he's geared himself towards grappling, he can definitely find some success. I think, of course, there are points to be scored with control, and I think Jalen Turner can score those points. But I also think there are opportunities to present themselves. And Jalen Turner is a dangerous submission artist. Maybe not as dangerous as he is on the feet, but he's dangerous everywhere. And Bahamondes, who's got a rock solid chin himself, he's been submitted a few times. In years past, if I can use that expression again, he was submitted against Preston Parsons and this other guy, Matt McKean, I think. I don't know. But either way, the Preston Parsons fight was a generic armbar. He took him down, advanced on him, and closed the show. He hasn't been submitted since then, but still, I don't know if he's out of the woods there. And I think Jalen Turner, being very dangerous, can put all that to the test. I also think In general, on the feet, I have more concern about Jalen Turner with his chin. I think that's the bigger liability, certainly on the feet. But I also think Jalen Turner is more dangerous. And I certainly think, especially early on, he is more dynamic. He can slow down. Who doesn't? But when he's firing on all cylinders, Jalen Turner is going to be a problem for Bahamondes, I think, everywhere. But hopefully, while he's firing on all cylinders, he decides to mix it up and grapple. Because I do think whether he's gearing himself towards a submission or a decision there, Jalen Turner will be winning that battle. Bahamondes, he's definitely not exactly Mr. One Shot Kill danger guy, but he's still dangerous and he can make shit happen. I just point you to that Roosevelt Roberts knockout, spinning wheel kick, I think in the final seconds of round three, which was just phenomenal and obviously a nice showcase of his danger. But I do think punch for punch. I don't know if he's got the conventional punching firepower to go through the chin of Jalen Turner. Jalen Turner's been knocked out a bunch, even as an amateur and as a pro, but the only guy to do it in recent memory was Vicente Luque, who's a fucking monster, obviously, and a welterweight monster. So I think Jalen Turner, if he doesn't get hit with anything too wild or too spinning with enough force on it, I think he's going to survive. His chin will survive against Bahamondes. And it's not like Jalen Turner hasn't been hurt before. He had that absolute dogfight against Dan Hooker. He was certainly hurt in that one. But I do think, yeah, he's got to protect himself. I think Bahamondes' primary path to victory is knockout here, and that might be worth playing as a hedge. But my play so far has been Jalen Turner, and I've played the props, submission, and decision. But I do think Jalen Turner as an underdog is enticing enough for me because certainly he's incredibly dangerous on the feet. I mean, the guy's a potent knockout artist. Just ask Bobby Green about that. But I also think with the way he's been fighting as of, or talking as of late about his jiu-jitsu training and his grappling training since the loss to Renato Moicano, we could see a totally different Jalen Turner here, and that's the prediction. Again, I'm going with him winning by submission, although a decision would be just as surprising, frankly. But yeah, Jalen Turner is the pick, and primarily Jalen Turner is the play. Next up in the co-main event, we have Rafael Fiziev taking on Justin Gaethje. My prediction for this fight is Gaethje wins by decision, and I'm not too confident in that prediction. I believe that was my prediction the first time around, but here, Justin Gaethje, of course, is coming off a devastating knockout loss. Yeah, you know I have to mention it. And of course, Justin Gaethje is now 36 and a half years old. So in general, I think he's just in worse condition than he was 2 years ago when he beat Fiziev the first time. But still, Rafael Fiziev is coming off a fucking knee injury that we saw live on TV. So I'm sure he's got a lot of questions to answer himself about his physical condition. The last time we truly saw him in a fight was against Gaethje. And even though I did think Gaethje won that fight, and I certainly think he got the better of Fiziev at the end of it, it still could have gone either way on the scorecards. It was a razor thin fight on the cards, and Fiziev proved back then he could beat Justin Gaethje, and I still think he can today, certainly. But I'm picking Gaethje because he was the better man down the stretch in that fight. Once he made his reads and figured out Rafael Fiziev, who was definitely leading the dance with much sharper striking, Gaethje, once he figured him out, he took over that fight and in the end started battering Fiziev and even took him to the ground to show that he can hit a takedown. And I think, look, he won a majority decision, Gaethje. The majority comes from a 10-8 round that he got in round three. So no doubt he got the better of that 15 minutes, but still, it was razor thin back then, and I think it's going to be a really tough fight today or in 2 days. But yeah, Fiziev, he's stepping up on short notice. I know he was looking to fight Gamrot. I thought I heard him say in like February or whatever. So clearly he's been gearing himself towards fighting. But Justin Gaethje's the guy in optimal condition. He's the guy who's been planning to fight Dan Hooker for 2 or 3 months now, and that 8 to 12 month plan is culminating on Saturday night. So I think it stands to reason that he's the guy who's in better shape, and considering the advantages he had down the stretch in the first fight, I think those advantages should be there for him in this fight, if not exacerbated. That's one of my big words. I've got a few big words, and I really lean on them. Metamorphosis. Remember that one? Anyway, Gaethje, yeah, he was the better man down the stretch, and tip-top shape Gaethje here, I think, will be the better man down the stretch in this one. Of course, I told you I have to talk about it. He was knocked out cold against Max Holloway, and I mean, the fight itself was a beating. It was a 5-round beating. But getting face planted like that at the end was a horrible look for Gaethje. It looked like a life-changing, career-changing knockout. And yeah, I'm sure he's looking to get back in there. I know he's looking to get back in there and show Justin Gaethje again, because he didn't give a fuck who was going to take this fight. He was, I mean, the proof of it is that he's fighting Rafael Fiziev again. Fiziev's very dangerous. He's a tough matchup. Gaethje knows better than anybody, and Gaethje already has a win over him. He's got really nothing to gain here, but everyone's respect, I guess, or some shit like that. But professionally, this doesn't exactly propel him up the ladder, even though he's really high up on the ladder anyway. But yeah, I do think Gaethje does have a chip on his shoulder. I do think he's put himself to the test in the training room. I'm sure he has. And it's not like he's stepping right back in there. We're coming up on 11 months, I believe, since his knockout loss. But yeah, there are still questions that have to be answered in the cage, because training is training. And Saturday night will be the 36-year-old stepping in the octagon coming off the knockout loss. So we'll find out Saturday night, but I'm going with Justin Gaethje, just like I did in the first fight. I think, and maybe it won't take him as long to adjust to Rafael Fiziev, who I do think is technically superior when he's firing on all cylinders. But Gaethje, he hits like a fucking truck, and he was able to take over that last one, and that's my prediction here. And as for the bet, I don't feel too comfortable betting on Justin Gaethje, but I'm going to do it anyway. He is an underdog. But yeah, I think this is going to be a pretty tight fight, and there are a lot of X factors, really, on both sides. And in the main event of the evening, we have Alex Poatan Pereira taking on Magomed Ankalaev. This is the fight. My prediction for this fight, and I fucking hate saying it, I'm going with Ankalaev, and I've got him winning by decision. Although a knockout wouldn't surprise me if he was the win either. On the flip side, I can say it would surprise me if Alex Pereira won in any other way but knockout, just because he is who he is. But yeah, the prediction is Ankalaev. All right, the prediction is Ankalaev wins. I think Ankalaev is that guy that's going to put Poatan to the test like he hasn't been tested before. We've seen Jan Blachowicz take him down. We've seen plenty of people take him down. But I think Magomed Ankalaev is that next level. I think Ankalaev knows he's got one job to do, and that's take Poatan to the mat, even though he's got a few other jobs, protect his calves and the rest of it. But he's got to take Poatan to the mat here. And Ankalaev has not been the most reliable wrestler throughout his career because his striking is very sharp. But here he knows he's got to do this. So I'm sure he's been sharpening his wrestling despite all the horse shit he said in the media about how he's not shooting a takedown. Yeah, sure. He's going to be shooting takedowns here. And I think if he's relentless and if he protects his calves, He's going to be able to pressure Poatan throughout the majority of this fight. And I've got him winning a decision by hitting takedowns and by winning on pressure. But, of course, actually pressuring and taking down Poatan can open up opportunities on the feet. And again, Ankalaev is very fucking dangerous himself. But yeah, again, the first knockout in this fight would certainly go to Pereira, in my opinion. If nobody took anybody to the ground, it's Poatan's fight. The calf kicks are the best weapon, and Magomed Ankalaev needs to look no further than his fight against Jan Blachowicz to see how effective those calf kicks can be. That is the reason that fight was not a victory. And the reason it wasn't a loss is because of his wrestling, which took over the fight in the last 2 rounds, and even secured him a 10-8 round, which is why it was a draw. But yeah, he needs to look no further than to that fight for just about every lesson he needs for this fight, because Poatan, not that Jan Blachowicz isn't big, strong, and dangerous, but Poatan's on that next level, especially when it comes to calf kicks, and those Poatan calf kicks can take you out of the fight. And of course, he's got the left hook from hell, which is a singular better weapon than any calf kick or any other strike. He can knock anybody unconscious with that. And Ankalaev has obviously never been TKO'd, but I don't need to see him get TKO'd to know that Poatan could knock him out or TKO him. But I still think, Ankalaev will be winning this fight. Ankalaev, I think his wrestling is going to be sharper than some people expect it to be. He's a guy who's, I'm sure, been doing nothing but sharpening his grappling over the last few months, preparing for this title fight. And he's a guy who's only got one loss, and it's not a loss you can look to for Alex Pereira. Magomed Ankalaev was submitted in the final second of a 15-minute fight against Paul Craig, otherwise known as Paul Craig. And Ankalaev was winning that fight comfortably. He'd be a 25-1 favorite in the rematch, but he got a little lackadaisical and sat there, let Paul Craig cinch up a triangle, and even then, Ankalaev could have won the fight if he didn't tap immediately, but he did tap. Not that I'm trying to harp on that and beat him over the head with it, because I know it probably keeps him up at night to this day. But yeah, that is not a path to victory for Poatan, even though Poatan's probably got some deceptively tricky submission skills. But I don't think either guy is going to be finishing this fight via submission. Ankalaev, who is the grappler in this matchup, he doesn't have a submission victory. I don't know if he's aware that you can do submissions in MMA. But I'm picking him to win without even attempting one. I'm going with Ankalaev. Decision is the official prediction, but of course, the second prediction for Ankalaev is knockout. I hope I'm wrong. I hope Poatan can prove me wrong. And I know if he does, he's going to do so in very fucking exciting fashion. And plus, Poatan winning, I think, with all he's done already, not only would it cement his legacy as a Hall of Famer, but it would maybe give him that super fight he's been looking for if Tom Aspinall doesn't get it. Regardless, Poatan is one of my favorite fighters. He's certainly my favorite champion. And Ankalaev is my prediction to win. But no doubt I will not be disappointed if I'm wrong. Like, share, subscribe, all that horse shit, and check out my other videos. You cocksucker.